Hello, everybody. My name is Alan, and it's that time again. Let's talk metal. Tonight, I'm making a video in response to a video contest on another YouTube channel. This is a channel run by Raul Serrano, who I don't know, but he's another metalhead on YouTube, and he recently passed 100 subscribers. So congratulations, Raul, on passing that milestone. To commemorate the event, Raul's running a contest for a few weeks where he's asking people to pick a genre of music. It can be any style whatsoever, doesn't have to even be a type of heavy metal. It could be some non-metal style that you like. And he's asking people to then make a video where they talk about 5 of their personal favorite albums from that genre. So this sounded like a lot of fun, and I figured I'd do it as well. I want to give a shout out to Ben over at the Brainsmasher channel because he's the one who picked up on this contest. He recently posted his own video entry to the contest. And in his video, he encouraged other people to sort of, pick up on this, spread the word, and help give Raul a really good response, kind of boost his signal and get him a lot of entries for the contest because it sounds like a really cool idea. So all the more reason to go ahead and do it myself. So when trying to decide what genre I wanted to do, my first thought was, oh, this would be a great chance to talk about some doom metal or maybe some more new wave of British heavy metal, power metal, which I like a lot. But when I thought about it some more, I decided on thrash metal. I decided this for a couple of reasons, not just to copycat Ben, who also picked thrash metal for his genre. I am kind of in the same boat with Ben, though, when it comes to thrash. It's a genre that I grew up with. It's what I cut my teeth on when I got into real heavy metal. Thrash was the thing to listen to in the late 80s and earliest 90s. But over time, I've kind of drifted away from thrash a little bit. I feel like thrash eventually got into a very weird place that as death metal got very popular in the 90s and then black metal after that, those genres were much more extreme than thrash metal. And so thrash metal kind of lost its title as, the heaviest stuff around to listen to. And at the same time, you also had other bands go in other directions where if people want to listen to something that was not so dark or heavy or aggressive, they would listen more to power metal and things like, Blind Guardian and Halloween and those bands. And I feel like it left thrash in kind of an awkward middle spot. And I've often wondered if that had something to do with the decline of thrash in the early and mid-90s. People often talk about thrash going downhill and dwindling, mainly due to grunge, which I'm sure didn't help matters any. But I think there was also this factor that thrash was just no longer the most extreme thing folks could listen to, and it wasn't the most melodic thing people could listen to, and it wasn't the most commercial thing folks could listen to. And so, the fan base kind of got pulled in other directions. And so thrash was kind of left stuck there, as the middle child. But enough about me theory crafting about the demise of thrash. We all know thrash is still around and doing well. So let's talk about some of the albums that I really like from thrash. And again, this is not meant to be the best 10 thrash metal albums ever. The whole point of the contest is just to talk about thrash metal albums you like. Now, one of the rules for Raul's contest is you pick 5 albums, or you can get entered twice if you do 10 albums. So, of course, I've decided to do 10. If anybody else is watching and decides they want to do this also, definitely check out his website. I'll leave a link to it and also to Ben's Brainsmasher channel down below. The deadline for the contest is August 27th, 2020. So that's when you got to have your video posted by. Okay, without further ado, let's get started. Going to start with some CDs and a few sort of obvious ones to get the ball rolling here. Choice number 1 is Megadeth. Peace sells, but who's buying? One of just the coolest thrash metal albums ever. It's my favorite Megadeth album by just a little bit. Rust in Peace is very, very close. But I feel this is David Mustaine at his most dangerous. This is when he still had a huge chip on his shoulder. He was still out to prove to the world that Metallica sucked and he could do anything they could do and do it better. This has the definitive Megadeth lineup on it. They sound incredible. The album always sounds like it's about 3 seconds from just falling apart, but they always hold it together at the same time. It's loose, it's all over the place, but it's also very, very tight. It's got this weird vibe throughout it. Has, of course, the classic Megadeth cover art with Vic there in front of the bombed out UN building. One of my favorite pieces of cover art ever. I've thought about buying a reissue of this on LP just to frame it and put it up on the wall behind me, like some of the other albums back there. Tons of great tracks on this one. You know, personal favorites, things like Devil's Island. The title track, of course, is great. And of course, the Killers that opened up on side 2, Good Morning, Black Friday. A lot of great stuff on here. Really, the only track I could do without is probably the cover of I Ain't Superstitious. Didn't necessarily need to include that. Also closes with the Killer, My Last Words, which is a track that gets overlooked a lot. So if I want to pick a Megadeth album, this is the one I'm going to go with. All right. Entry number 2 is Death Angel. Band that lots of folks hold pretty high, one of the old school California Bay Area thrash bands. I'm going with Frolic Through the Park, which is not one that most people would pick as their favorite Death Angel. Most folks always gravitate to the Ultraviolence. Nothing wrong with the Ultraviolence. It's a good record too. I always liked Frolic Through the Park a little bit better. For me, this album has a lot more personality. It's more unique and more individualistic. While Ultraviolence is a good album, it sort of always felt to me like a very straightforward thrash metal album. That I could pick a lot of other albums that are very similar to it if I want to listen to something like that. But this album has a little bit of a quirkiness to it. They're having fun with a lot of these songs, but they're still very tight, still well performed. And I just always liked the identity of the album, that it didn't sound exactly like any other thrash album. So lots of good stuff on this one as well. They, of course, have gone on to have a pretty long career. I'm not as familiar with their newer stuff, but anytime I want Death Angel, Frolic Through the Park is going to be my first choice. All right, number 3, sticking with some of the big name bands here at the beginning. Third pick, let's go to New York and get a little Anthrax in the mix. Now I'm going to pick Persistence of Time. This is very, very close between Persistence and Fistful of Metal. Fistful is a great album, like that one an awful lot, but Persistence of Time is the one that I usually will take out and replay. This is the one that even now, pretty much 30 years later, Jesus, I'm old. Yeah, I will still come back and take this off the shelf at least a couple of times a year and jam at least half the album, if not the entire album. I thought it was Anthrax at their best. The songs are very tight, very well written. They get their messages across in them, but without being preachy or dragging the songs down at all. You've got lots of cool stuff on here. Time, Blood, Keep It in the Family. You've got Belly of the Beast, Got the Time, just crazy, great stuff. Prime Anthrax. After this, of course, things changed and were never quite the same. So this is also, you know, kind of the last big hurrah for Anthrax. Couldn't fault anybody for picking Fistful of Metal over this one. I just don't take that one out and replay it quite as much as I do Persistence of Time. So I picked Persistence of Time. All right, choice number 4. This is a band I do not think gets mentioned nearly enough. Not just when people are talking about thrash, but when they're talking about the really killer bands from the 80s. It is Switzerland's Mighty Coroner. Why does this band not get talked about a little bit more? Coroner does some fantastic stuff. Tommy T. Barron is just incredible on the guitar. Amazing stuff. This is one of those albums that even I don't go back and play it enough. And if you didn't catch it, this is their debut, RIP. This is one of those albums you play it and it's just mind-bogglingly good. And I think to myself, why don't I play this all the time? And then I blink and it's 2 years later and I haven't played it again. So shame on me, shame on you if you're not giving Coroner their props. This is easily my favorite Coroner album. The second one, Punishment for Decadence, also really strong, but it never quite clicked as well as RIP. I haven't visited Punishment for a long time, but yeah, this album is always high regard. So if you're talking thrash and you're forgetting about Coroner, go back and check it out. Sure, the US scene is a big deal. Sure, Germany had plenty of thrashers, but Coroner really knew what they were doing. All right, that's 4. So I need one more to finish up my first entry in the contest here. And for this one, I'm going to pick Heathens, Victims of Deception. Heathen was a really good band that put out 2 albums back in the day. They've, of course, gotten back together and done more albums since. Most people always gravitate towards the first Heathen album, Breaking the Silence, which, again, is a good album. I like it. But this, to me, was the album. This one was so good. And it came along a little later. It was a 1991 release, if I remember right. And, you know, it's a little late for thrash again. People were starting to turn their attention a lot more to death metal or grunge or, you know, just other things. Thrash wasn't king of the hill anymore. And so the album got a little overlooked. But on here, the band sounds very tight. The songs are very well put together. Always really dug this album. I thought it was much more mature sounding and more robust sounding than their debut, which again is good, but if Breaking the Silence was the only album they'd ever done, I wouldn't have paid a lot of attention to Heathen. But this album really solidified them as one of the classics, one of the really great bands from late in the thrash movement. Interesting little side note, I got this CD back in the day from one of those Columbia House BMG mail-in things. The things you used to see in magazines where you'd get like 10 CDs for a penny if you signed up for their things. You can get stuff like Heathen on those lists sometimes. It wasn't always just, you know, Backstreet Boys and Prince and Madonna CDs. Okay, so there are 5 thrash metal entries. Let's do one more entry with one more set of 5. I'm going to switch over to some vinyl for this one. Something I didn't mention, I'm doing these in no particular order except for my favorite. That I'm going to save for the very end because I do have a very clear-cut favorite album when it comes to thrash. All right. So starting the next batch of 5 with some vinyl entries. Here's another album I feel gets way, way less credit than it deserves. This is Holy Terror's first album, Terror and Submission. Now, when you get into sort of the hardcore thrash fans and folks who really, really know their 80s stuff, they'll talk about Holy Terror, but they always talk about the second album, Mind Wars. And it is a really great album, not contesting that at all. It's very over the top, has a crazy sound to it. But Terror and Submission is no slouch. This is a badass album right here. Tons of great tracks on it. You've got Evil's Rising. You've got Blood of the Saints. Hit after hit. Really well put together. Very heavy, very fast thrash metal. Always loved this album. Used to play this to death on the turntable. Not one that should get overlooked. These guys did a really good job of writing songs that could be very heavy and very aggressive, but also had really good hooks in them. They always had parts in every song that get stuck in your head, very catchy, and you'd find yourself, you know, singing along with them all the time. So it always had something to keep bringing you back to this album over and over again. So Terror and Submission, you cannot go wrong with this album. All right, let's stick to the vinyl stack a little bit longer. And this is another one that, again, this is a personal favorites list. So I picked a few that are just personal favorites. I always liked this one, and I never hear folks talk about it. It is the second album from Intruder out of Nashville, Tennessee. It is called A Higher Form of Killing. Now, I understand this album did absolutely nothing to push the boundaries. It didn't reinvent the genre. It didn't introduce some, you know, crazy over-the-top musical virtuoso style or anything. It is a very standard issue thrash metal album on Metal Blade. Came out around 88, 89. But for whatever reason, I always really liked this album. It's one of those things I just bought blind at a record store as a kid because it was in the heavy metal section, had a cool logo, had a cool cover, had a cool title. It was clearly a thrash metal album. Couldn't go wrong. I didn't hear their debut album until long after I had gotten this one. I remember the first song on here, Time of Trouble, is kind of a long intro thing where there's like a fake sort of sounds of somebody flipping through radio channels, and every time it stops for a few seconds, you're getting clips of headlines about doom and destruction, war, terrorist attacks, and stuff like that. And I remember playing this on a ghetto blaster, walking through the mall. Right, I just bought the tape, put it right into the ghetto blaster, and was walking through the mall with this playing, and people kept looking over and just like, I realized after a couple minutes, like, oh crap, people probably think this is a real news broadcast and that something just got bombed or burlowed up or something. Maybe I should wait and play this back on the bus on the drive home or something. But a lot of cool songs. Again, I'm not claiming this deserves to be in the Thrash Metal Hall of Fame or anything, but for my personal favorites, I always thought it was a cool album. Always liked it. Last little tidbit I'll point out here. They had a quote up here at the top that says, in no future war will the military be able to ignore the use of poison gas. It is a higher form of killing. And it's taken from a scientist on receiving the Nobel Prize for Chemistry back in the 1918, it says? 1919, sorry. So that was the reference. A higher form of killing was referring to chemical warfare. And I actually used this quotation in a paper I had to write in English class back in the day. So, hey, fun to bang your head to, and educational too. That's Intruder. All right, got 2 more vinyl entries I want to show. These may be slightly contentious because some people probably won't think of these as thrash bands all the time, but I always thought they definitely deserve to be mentioned along with the other greats in thrash metal. If you disagree, you're wrong and you're stupid and I hate you. No, not really. It's cool. This is my favorites list, so I'm putting stuff on that I really like. One of the real heavy hitters, Agent Steel's debut, Skeptic's Apocalypse. These early Agent Steel albums are really, really heavy hitters. A lot of people, again, will pick their second album. The second album I like, but it kind of pulls in different directions a little bit. There's no big change in style, but I don't find as many of the songs as hard-hitting or long-lasting. It wasn't an album I felt the need to go back and replay over and over. Not that it's bad, but it just never grabbed me. But this album always gets revisited. Let's run through the tracks on side 1. You've got Agents of Steel, Taken by Force, Evil Eye, Evil Minds, and Bleed for the Gods. This is as strong an A-side as you will find on any heavy metal album made in the 1980s. I challenge anyone to come up with an album that has a better running list on the A-side than what I just read off. These are unbelievable pounders. They're fast, they're aggressive, they're tight, and of course, they've got the insane over-the-top lyrical vocal delivery by John Cyrus. You can't get much better than this. And again, some folks may say, Agent Steel's not true thrash. Whatever. This is firmly rooted in that headbanging, riff-heavy, very aggressive style. If it's not thrash metal to you, it sure as hell thrash metal to me. All right. One last one on vinyl. We're up to number 9 here total. And this is another band that some folks will not put in the thrash bin. I always thought this band should be in with the other thrash acts. I'm talking this time about Canada's Unstoppable Exciter, and the album I've chosen is their second, Violence and Force. Again, some folks are always like, wait, Exciter's not thrash metal. I'm just like, I'm not sure what Exciter you're listening to, but it sounds pretty damn thrashy to me. A lot of these early Exciter tracks, they're all built on that Motorhead scaffolding of really heavy, just thundering riffs, over-the-top guitars screaming at you, total energy. Exciter, the name was very appropriate. They always packed a big punch. These songs came out swinging. They hit you in the face. They run over you fast and just pummel. This is perfect headbanging music. A lot of folks might take Heavy Metal Maniac over this album, and Heavy Metal Maniac is a great record. When I line them up side by side, track to track, I got to go with Violence and Force. This just has so many killers on it. You, of course, have the great opening track, the title track, Violence and Force. You've got things like Evil Sinner, which is insane. And for some reason, it's left off some of the CD reissues, which, boo, get the original vinyl with Evil Sinner on it. Side 2, it just keeps going. You've got things like the amazing Saxons of the Fire. This is pure. Throw up the horns, bang your head, pound a beer, and thrash out with your buddies metal. So, can't do favorite thrash stuff without mentioning Exciter. Okay, that is 9. That brings us to number 10. And as I said, this one is clearly my favorite thrash album. It's probably my second favorite heavy metal album ever recorded. There's only one album I would rank a little higher than this one. The album we're talking about is Overkill's Years of Decay. This was one of the first real heavy metal albums I ever got. It wasn't the very first. The first real metal album I got was Metallica's And Justice for All. And it ain't on this list, and never will be. This has stayed in my playlists now for the better part of 30 years. Love this album to death. Most of the early Overkill stuff is really good. Horoscope, that came after this, also a really good album. After that, when they started getting more into the groove metal side of things, I wasn't so interested. But the track list here, just hit after hit after hit. I can sing this whole album almost start to finish, probably even today. You've got Time to Kill, you've got Elimination, you've got I Hate, you've got Playing with Spiders, Skull Crusher, you've got one of the final chapters of the Evil Never Dies long-running song series that went back to even their demo days with Death Rider and stuff. The album is amazing. It's aggressive but tight. It's got a good sound, and you really can just feel the vitriol from Bobby Blitz coming through the speakers at you, that this guy is pissed. He hates everything. It was a perfect soundtrack for a teenager bored living out in the sticks back in the day. And I love the album to death even now. So that would be my favorite thrash album, and that will finish up my entries for Raul's contest. So hope everybody enjoyed this. Let's go ahead and keep talking metal in the comments down below. If you're not going to make a video, that's quite okay, but what are some of your personal thrash metal favorites? And in particular, ones that maybe you feel don't get enough mention either, or you feel that are kind of on the edge of thrash metal that some people might not even put in the category. Leave a comment down below. Make up your own sort of 5 favorites list, and we'll keep talking there. All right, that's enough for now. Everybody stay safe, and I'll talk to you again next time.